Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. So I spent most of the afternoon laying out the legs and I had an error. I measured from the bottom up and I worked my way up, and when I got to the top I didn't have a full 3/4 for the top rail. Somewhere magically I was missing 1/4 of an inch. So I chased everything down, double checked all my measurements, and if I'd have just gone back and see what I cut for final lengths first, I'd have found my problem. So my legs were all cut 1/4 of an inch too short. So how do we fix it? I could shorten my legs, but I don't want to do that. I like the way that those legs look. So I'm going to take the error. I'm going to change my top rail from 3/4 to a 5/8 rail. As well, I'm going to shorten that top drawer by the remaining. It'll all be relative to the piece. You'll never notice it, but that's why they say measure twice, cut once. So let me change the camera around and I'll give you some close-ups of the layouts for all the cuts that we have to do. Okay, so I made most of my marks in pencil, so I know they're a little difficult to see, especially out here. So on the fronts, I just have a couple of little guidelines on here to show me where the rails are supposed to land. Okay, on the inside faces of the front legs, again, I carried those lines over for where the rail was going to land, as well as I marked out for all of the locations of where the web frames land. Initially, I thought we were going to do a 3/4 by 3/4 notch. And that didn't work out well for the 1/4 inch reveal on the front because my stock to get it flat and straight was a little bit narrower than the drawing. So I'm just going to back those off to a 1/2 inch notch and I'll have plenty in there for the web frames. And so then on the very back legs, again I have a mark for the rail, but I also have a center line on here because this is where the panel is going to drop in. In this case it would be the side-to-side panel. And if we go back here to the front and turn that over, it's also on the back side of the front legs. So those should line up. One setup should get us. And then on the very back, this is where the back panel is going to actually be recessed in. And I'll put that together with screws. Putting the back panel on last allows me to make adjustments to the drawers and whatnot without that back panel being in the way. So this will make more sense to you as we go. Hey guys, I apologize. I seem to have dropped a video clip somewhere today. So I wanted to come back and show you what I did before I show you my reality check on how I groove these legs. So this is my test leg. And all I did was I found my center and I lined and set up my fence for center. And then on the end, I had a stop point on the actual leg, and I moved my fence in to where it was going to stop. So then all I did was actually feed the leg through until it reached my stop point. And then I killed the machine. So I also have an in-feed support set up, and all 4 of these legs were cut exactly the same way. I cut them with a 1/2 inch spiral bit, and I cut them to 3/8 depth. So now, let's go back to my reality check here, and we'll get moving on. So just a bit of a reality check to make sure everything's going to line up, and those look pretty dead on to me for sliding the panel in. That's the right side set of legs, so front right and rear right. So the other side looks just the same, so moving on. And that should be good enough to take the panel. Okay, so now that we've got those grooves cut, as much as I really wanted to move on to the web frame notches, because I've got that set up in the router table already, which is going to be perfect for cutting that same slot in these rails, I'm going to go ahead and mill up and cut these rails next to the length on the drawing. So I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of lumber milling, and I'm going to just cut, find some nice stock, get it milled up flat. I'm going to mill it to 3/4, cut them 1.5 inches wide, and of course to the lengths by the drawing. So give me a couple of minutes and I'll cut all those parts. Okay guys, that took me a little longer than I expected. I not only milled up our rail parts, but I also went ahead and milled up the poplar for the web frame, since it needed to be the same thickness, as well as all the front rails and that center divider. Again, this is all just a 3/4. It's all rough cut to length, but the thickness was more important than anything else. So since I was set up for milling, I just went ahead and did that. So next up, we'll go ahead and start figuring out those side rails to tie in with our grooves on the legs, and maybe look at a dry fit here before too long. Okay, so I just changed my fence setup on the router table. I left my bit height exactly as it was before, and I'm going to cut that same groove and center it in the top and bottom rails. Now the very top rails, because it's got that arch panel, will allow for that. We'll actually raise this up to account for that, so we can fit a square panel in there and make life very easy, very quick to install, and just make our cuts much easier. So we're going to start with this, and then we'll come back to those tops. Okay, so I've raised my bit in the table, and I'm going to go ahead and run a second pass in both of my top pieces and make this groove even deeper. So I've set up my crosscut sled. I've got my blade height set at 1/4 inch. I've had my stop in the fence set at 1 inch. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut these tenons. That's too deep for these legs, but I'm going to come back with the router and deepen that mortise in just that one little section of the leg. So kind of a haunch tenon, if you will, just to get a little bit more stability in that joint. Okay, so now it looks like I just need to mark that and deepen that mortise up in that area to take this whole tenon. Okay, so I'm back at the router table, and all I have to do now is increase the depth of that mortise. And I've laid out a line here for how deep to go, so that it'll take that top rail the way that we want it. Okay guys, so there you go. They're all clamped up, just dry fit. They fit super nice. We still got to cut the curves in the rails and cut the notches for the web frames and do all that kind of stuff. I told you there was a lot of joinery in these legs. There's a lot of fitting that has to be done. There's a lot of trial and error, and it is what it is, so it just takes time. So we're making good progress though, and when we get going again, we'll go ahead and cut those curves and start working on web frames. So until then guys, take care.